Thanks for having me, Seven Signal folk, and hello to everybody. Um, Life after 802.11 AC. I know I am certainly living it. And at the end, hopefully, we have questions and comments from those who are also living it and those who are still in it and looking forward to the future. So I need to give you some full disclosure. The Duluth News Tribune did not say I was simply brilliant. That's a forward-looking statement, and I'm hoping someday they bestow that on me. So don't think less of me. And today's topic, again, life after 802.11 AC. You know, we've been doing Wi-Fi, some of us, those of us of a certain vintage, for over 20 years. Wi-Fi has certainly been with us for over 20 years. It's still profoundly messy in a lot of spots. Thankfully, we continue to evolve in generally positive directions. So today we're going to talk about how life, for both us in the business of wireless and how our, end users are experiencing the post 802.11 AC Wi-Fi thing. I truly feel that 11 AC has been, pretty damn good, especially Wave 2. As I list out here, lots of things need to line up right to make it, all that it can be and all that it has been. But when those things line up, clients can simply use the Wi-Fi and they don't have to think about it. We kind of finally got to that point where maybe people aren't doing speed tests and kind of obsessing about the results they're getting when they do speed tests and all of that. To me, that's kind of the ultimate SLA, is your end users could just use it. They don't have to think much about it. And for me, at least over my career, 11N was good. Wi-Fi has always been interesting. It's always been fun. It's in the early days, it was a bit of a novelty, but throughout the 11AC, run of things, to me, that's really when the hook really sunk deep and people just got used to it. It's like, yep, you built a good network. I can use it. I don't have to think about it. And, that's kind of what 11AC at least in my corner of the world, gave us. And again, lots of things need to line up, as I list out here, to make it work. But it has been pretty good. There is a reason Ethernet adapters are no longer standard on, laptops. And I think, again, 11AC, that kind of came about with 11AC becoming ubiquitous. I don't think it's coincidental. In the early part, or at the end of 11N, it was very common to order a laptop and it would have both. Wi-Fi, Ethernet was still standard, and you'd get Wi-Fi. Maybe it's a culture thing. We're all just getting used to Wi-Fi, but I also think that Wi-Fi matured to the point where you could lose that Ethernet adapter and truly not miss it. So again, before we talk about life after 11AC, we need to talk about 11AC a little bit. Give you some reminders. Some of this is straight out of the standards, painted over with a little bit of realism. For those of you who don't remember, 802.11 AC was only a 5 gig standard when you bought a dual band 11 AC AP. 2.4 gig does not do 11 AC. It's a standard that was written for 5 gig, so you're actually doing 11N. On the 2.4 side, modulation is always a hallmark of whatever wireless technology you're talking about. 11 AC was the 256. When it came out, that was impressive. It was a big number for modulation. Basically, the rest of this stuff, as you look at it, the first handful of bullets, 11 AC talked a really good game for the marketers and for the perhaps the less savvy, tech journalists out there that would cover it. That was the hype. Woo, look at these huge things. We're going to get data rates to almost 7 gig. But then those of us in the real world, we know that somewhere past the hype comes reality. We know that reality is going to be much better than the last standard, but still kind of nebulous. Even so, it was very much better. And the seed I always like to plant, you know, for 11AC to be good, just like for 11AX, just like for earlier standards, you know, good design and good code from the vendors. If you don't have those, you're not going to have a good experience. You know, again, just general review of 11AC. A little bit more on that. 11AC, you know, we're going to talk about spectrum analysis a little bit as we go, but you know, with 11AC, we're in 2.4, we're in 5 gig. The same spectrum analyzers, when we talk about just the RF visualization, not so much the picking apart the radio headers and all of that, because sometimes the tools do both. But when we talk about just analyzing, you know, spectrum itself, the RF side of it, it's still the same frequency bands. Nothing has changed there for visualizing the RF. So, you know, this goes way back, even before AG. It goes back to the original, at least on the 2.4 side, the original standard. RF is RF, the band is the band. Nothing has changed in 11AC. So we've been able to use some of our older tools to visualize all the way through 11AC. We absolutely know that packet capture did get a little bit busier, a little more complicated, a little more thorny. It does with every standard. You know, new frames are introduced, timing changes, the different modulation, the different streams. It just gets complicated. That happened with 11AC. But at the same time, we also, as I mentioned before, we finally saw data rates and we saw usable throughputs that let us leave that Ethernet cable more and more behind. I know that there are at least, I don't know if there are 2 full generations or what the demographic adjective I'm looking for, but I know that, you know, working for a big university, probably for the last decade, you know, the vast majority of students that I support, you hand them an Ethernet cable and they'll tell you something like, I don't have a telephone. I don't need this. I don't have a printer. I don't need this weird thing. Whatever this is, get it away from me. I don't use that. I don't know what that is. And that's kind of interesting. And again, these are youngsters that really grew up in a, you know, really grew up with 11AC when you think about it. And also, you know, 11AC, the backwards compatibility thing, for better or worse, it's there every time we're stuck with it. The reality is that many of us disable a lot of the 11B stuff minimally, you know, if not all the way up to disabling 11G kind of data rates and all of that. But, you know, whether we like it or not, the backwards compatibility thing was there with 11AC, just like it's been there with its predecessors. So that is just a quick, you know, walk through the grass, walk through the 11AC grass before we talk about life after it. So I wanted to get you that far at least. Now, as we go forward, I did have it lined up where the 7 Signal folks were going to sing you this rewrite of the Beatles yesterday, but then McCartney's folks got wind of it and slapped a restraining order on all of us. So we won't be doing that song. But basically, the top verse there of this silly little ditty, 6 gig, baby. Life is changing as we talk about 11AX. 11AX isn't just 6 gig, but it's arguably one of the more exciting parts of it. And that'll shine through as we keep going. I was really looking forward to Jim singing too.
Yeah, we just, you know, when the lawyers get involved.
Yeah, they screw everything up. So it is truly a new day, even though 11AX has been with us for a while. And, you know, I can only talk to you from my perspective. No matter how long you've been in the game, I'm sure you'll have noticed some of the things I talk about. And if you have yet to go to 11AX, if you're still living the 11AC lifestyle or earlier, which I know, some people are, depending on your vertical, some of what you're about to see is what you have to look forward to. So I have been deploying 11AX for over a year, 13, 14 months. Been doing the 6E, the 6 gig stuff for around 10 months. I will tell you part of the reason in my world why we're deploying it, even though the clients aren't there, that's something that gets discussed a lot. Well, we're going to wait for more clients. We're going to wait for Wi-Fi 7. One of the reason my group is deploying the 6 gig stuff now, even though there aren't an abundance of clients, the client counts are growing. But also, when you have an enormous environment, a lot of times you can't just wholesale replace APs. You have to schedule them. You have to, do it in big increments. So we're doing, 3, 4, 500 at a time. And then, the life cycle for those will be between 5, 7, 8 years. So, and also our legacy 11AC stuff will go end of life in the next couple of years. And our timing basically more or less requires us to get into it now. That's our that's how we came to that. So just let you know, the motivation behind that. And life, in fact, does change. That's why we're doing this webinar. At the same time, we're going to see that some of the old concerns are still on the table. The little graphic on the right-hand side, this is a live shot from one of my dashboards. Shows you, what's going on for one particular access point. I focused on the 6 gig radio, even though it also has a 2.4 and 5 gig going on the same AP. But just to show you, the phraseology, 6 gig statistics. It's one thing to talk about it; it's another thing to see it in the real world. Channel width is 80. We got some exotic channels in there, based. If you're not used to seeing them yet, the channel numbers are different. It's something new for your eyes to take in, and a new data set for your brain to process. And just kind of show you some examples of that as we walk our way through here. Up in the upper left, even though WPA3 isn't specifically tied to, it's not just for 6 gig. It's the latest security standard whenever you jump in. The interesting part is in 6 gig, you have to use it, whereas you don't have to use it in the other bands. So again, just different words. If you haven't got here yet, different terms on the interface, different things you have to think about. How are you going to implement WPA3? What SSIDs can you run 6 gig in out of the ones that you have, or do you have to create new ones? And how do you address their security paradigms versus how you are now? If you look below the security graphic, to the one directly below on the left, the statistics, we're actually seeing, the data rates that you hope to see, the big honking, multi-hundreds of bits, multi-hundred of megabit data rates. I've seen as high as, 1500. I just lazily grabbed the first one I could find that seemed mildly impressive. We've talked about for years, we've been promised big whopping data rates that we just really haven't generally achieved. I'm starting to see them as a matter of routine, and that's kind of impressive when you pull up these data rates and you think, yeah, that's Wi-Fi, that's not Ethernet, that's Wi-Fi. And again, it's data rate, not throughput that we're looking at, but at the same time, there is a wow factor to it. And it's kind of, I don't want to say exciting, but it is, you start to feel like, okay, maybe we finally did get what we paid for, and it's kind of living up to at least some of its hype. and past product sets and past standards didn't always deliver on that wow factor that you'd hope you'd see, just from overhype.
It really is a big increase. Just a little context. I mean, in an AC network with 20 megahertz channels and 2-stream clients, you know, the best you were getting was 173 megabits per second, which was great, and it still is great. You know, you can do almost anything with that. But I agree, Lee, when you see the typical numbers in 6 gigahertz with wide channels and 802.11ax, it's really the next it's clearly a big improvement over what was there before.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, if you haven't seen it, when you do, you can't help but be a little bit impressed when it's in your environment finally. Over on the right, you know, just to show you, I'm not actually running 160 meg, but just to show you the drop down. Some people are in this particular environment. I think we're auto channeling out to 80. But just to, you know, this is routine now. It once was a unicorn, the 160 meg channels, and we kind of laughed at people who attempted to do it in 5 gig, or at least I certainly did. And I'll freely admit that it's like, you know, when somebody would write up an article about the, you know, you're going to get 7 gigabits and you can use 160 megahertz channels, and you know, my first reaction is, A, you don't know what you're writing about, and B, you know, if this is going to work out, it's in somebody's garage or in some vendor's lab, and that's where reality ends. But that changes with 6 gig. And again, 11AX isn't just about 6 gig. I don't want to completely dwell on that, but it very much is a huge part of it. And again, you're going to see, you can't get away from what you're seeing when you go to 11AX. It is going to be there in the dashboard, whether you're using 6 gig or not. Even if you have to step around it, this information and these potential settings are going to be in your face. And then, as I mentioned, the you know, fairly exotic looking channel numbers that come with the 6 gig spectrum there on the lower right. It's just different. You get used to it pretty quickly, but there is a bit of a yeah, that's kind of neat. I've read about it. I haven't seen it yet. You know, that does, at least for me. You know, I kind of went through that wonderment phase when we got into this. So, you know, after 11AC, how do you see spectrum, right? We are we're very graphical in how we see the world as wireless professionals. The visuals are important. They're important for us to understand what's in play. It's also, you know, we use visuals to explain to people what's going on. These graphs are pretty important. So for 11AX, you know, how do we see this stuff? How do we visualize? Well, the first bullet there, as I mentioned, you know, plain old Wi-Fi 6 minus the E, you know, we're still in 2.4 and 5 gig. For spectrum analysis, the old tools still apply, but once you get into 6 gig, you do need something new. You've got to have a radio that can see 6 gig or multiple radios or whatever. What you're seeing in the graphic on the lower part of the slide, this is Meraki's built-in 6 gig spectrum analysis. Just one of the things I had handy to actually show you a little activity in the 6 gig band. But before I leave this, you know, there's more to come on the spectrum analysis topic too. But let me hit you with a provocative question. So, do you really need to see 6 gig spectrum? What if I said, yeah, we got 1200 megahertz. Doesn't matter what the hell's going on in it. It's just never going to be contention. It's just the Wild West. It's like way back when, you know, when people lived on the East Coast and everything west of the Mississippi was just, you know, wild and untamed. And, you know, that's the 6 gig spectrum right now. Do we even care what's out there? Does it matter? You know, we just know that we're using it, and you know, there's so much of it. The chances of contention and the chances of something going wrong Yeah, maybe we don't even need it. And the reason I'm throwing that out there is that was a conversation I actually took part in at the WLPC. Somebody was kind of pontificating like that, and it kind of put the thought in my mind, for the cost of the new MacBooks, like with the M2 chip or whatever that is, that you need to get the 6 gig, and the cost of some of the new spectrum analysis tools, not so much the software, but the underlying hardware that runs the new tools. Can you maybe slide for a year on having something in your hand that can do spectrum analysis? Maybe you can. Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. I'm not in a hurry to buy a bunch of new 6 gig tools. I know that we're going to need them, but I'm also trying to wait for the prices on some of it to come down, if they ever come down. And maybe I'm being silly, but I know that there's not that much going on yet that I feel totally compelled to run out on day one and get a expensive hardware that can do the 6 gig or do the 6 gig spectrum analysis. Just my own perspective. You might find that irresponsible of me, and yet I stand by it. But beyond spectrum analysis, right after 11AC, how do we capture frames in the AX world? Well, I kind of answer a question with a question. How do you capture frames regardless of technology, right? The bullets, I won't read you all of them, but other than just needing to have hardware that's capable, knowing what you're doing and being in range, it's interesting when if you've done this. Meraki does it, Mist does it. I can't tell you the other vendors don't do it, but I do know that I can't do this on my very easily on my current legacy Wi-Fi. But looking forward at what we're using for 6 gig, it's relatively easy. If you can't get your capture game together where you're going out and doing capture, it is very handy to let the native infrastructure do it for you. It's very easy to pull up, especially if they've done it well. You pull up the capability that's inbuilt into the system and do packet capture and decode right there on the spot. And then you can also download, put it into, if you prefer Wireshark, whatever, CloudShark, to be able to pull down a PCAP or digest it right within the interface. That is kind of game changing. You may not see everything you would see environmentally if you were to go out in the field with the tools in your hand, but at the same time, it is a fairly nice alternative, and it's pretty empowering, especially when you look at, like on the left, client. Which client do you want to capture on? Which SSID do you want to capture on? What APs do you want to use? Which band? It's a simple interface with a lot of power, and it's kind of nice. And the reason I highlight this is this sort of capability wasn't always there for a lot of vendors, but as 11AX comes out and the systems that support 11AX, or the systems that are 11AX from the vendors, get more feature rich, this sort of capability is becoming more common, and I find a lot of value in it. I'm not sure how the packet capture really, the gurus that we have among us, I'm not sure the value they would find in this sort of stuff, but I'm digging it. Unfortunately, after you go to 11AX, there is no silver bullet. A new technology, a new wireless standard does not fix all that is wrong out there in the wireless industry. Clients continue to be a bit of a mess. Those issues don't go away. Here's one that I actually ran into on one of my first Wi-Fi 6 deployments. We had a small quantity, I think it was like 3 out of 800 of Windows machines using these adapters, that because we had AX and AC both on the same SSID, they would not work, even though, you know, they're AC adapters. They just kind of went stupid because Wi-Fi 6 was present. And the fix supposedly by this document was to upgrade the driver. And it turned out that the fix for, in my case, was actually to downgrade the drivers. We had to do some experimentation. So nothing new under the sun when it comes to client issues. So don't expect 11AX to fix that. We absolutely have to talk about design, right? Excuse me. You know, if you're going to be deploying 11AX networks, you have to have some kind of tool that's capable of it. And thankfully, most of the tool makers have evolved. But at the same time, you have to do your part, and you have to get the upgrades to the software. And more importantly, you need to learn how to use it. You need to know what you're looking for. You need to know what you're planning for, right? You can't design things that you don't understand. That doesn't change. So, you know, thankfully the tools are there, but a fool with a tool is still a fool, and you don't want to be the fool. You got to know what you're doing. This is a kind of interesting, another discovery I made. You know, I know that there's a lot on the slide, and sorry for the messy way it got represented, but just start with, know that we're talking about switches, start with the orange. Warning, 37 APs are powered on insufficient power. So I fired up my first building worth of 11AX access points with the 6 gig radio, and I was greeted with this warning. Basically, your switches aren't giving enough power to the APs. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting because I'm using, you know, 802.3 BT beefy PoE switches, top of the line. They should be more than capable of handling whatever these APs need. Well, it turns out that for these particular switches, you have to market leading switches, mind you. You have to turn on BT. The command that turns it on requires a reboot of the switch, and there's only certain code that supports it. So you got to basically upgrade the code, which reboots the switch, and then you got to turn on that command, which reboots the switch. The short version of that narrative is do your homework and know that your switches are as they're going to need to be. You know, what is the draw of the 11AX AP that you're putting out? On the left side there, that is a 6 gig, I'm sorry, it's a Wi-Fi 6 AP. On that port on the left, on the one to the right, it's a 6E. So it wants a few more watts. Basically, out of the switch, it wants 31 watts. And if it doesn't get 31 watts, it's going to default to something. You're going to get less streams. You're going to get less power. The AP will work, but if it can't get the power that it needs, there are compromises. So if you can't give it what it needs, you have to understand what the compromises are. You know, are you going to get 2x2 in every band, 2x2 in some bands, less power? You know, you can't get full 4x4. What is the trade-off if you can't give it sufficient power? What does it take to give it sufficient power? If your switches are capable but not doing it, what is it in configuration that needs to happen to get you there? You know, so on. The PoE thing is its own study. And if you have different model switches, it only gets a little bit messier. It's, you know, I thought I had done due diligence, and I found out that I took some things for granted on the switching side of life when it comes to 11AX. On the lower right, if you look at the Ethernet port speed, the M-gig religious debates have been with us for a few years, right? I think going back to 11 certainly 11AC, maybe going back to 11N. You know, you have these debates about, well, when are we going to need to worry about oversubscribing a 1 gig uplink? And, you know, you'd have the marketing of the ridiculously high throughputs that you're going to get out of this vendor's APs does not match the, yeah, but you really don't, you're good on a 1 gig uplink. You don't have to change anything. Wait a minute, you're selling me that I'm going to get data rates that are 4 or 5 megabit or 4 or 5 gigabits, but you're telling me that I'm not going to oversubscribe a 1 gig uplink. Something in your story doesn't line up. And that's just been kind of a way of life for a few years now. The hype on the wireless and the data rates never really gets you to the point where you got to worry about being past 1 gig. I tell you what, if Wi-Fi 6 and 6E doesn't push us past that 1 gig thing routinely, we got a problem. I mean, we are all just living this colossal lie. So, you know, assuming that we're finally going to start exceeding the 1 gig uplinks on our switches, you know, you're going to have to consider what happens with your M gig. And, you know, here you can see what's being shown in that particular graphic in the lower right is the faster port speeds. This is nothing but a screen grab off an M gig switch. But if you're not there and you're not doing it, it's one more thing that's, you know, a little bit funky to see when you first bring to life your M gig switches. So there's also narrative, and again, these are real world, you know, things I'm seeing and living with after 11AC. You know, you convince the powers that be that you're going to put out 11AX, and then, you know, all of a sudden the speeds aren't as promised. That's nothing new. That happens with every standard, and you have to explain, you know, yeah, we put in Wi-Fi 6, your adapter is something less. You know, you might have to upgrade your client to actually take advantage of what we're offering. I mean, that's just business as usual. You know, just the education about the security changes. You know, WPA3 is new. The OWE thing, you know, depending on whether your SSID is using PSK, whether it's using 802.1x, whether it's an open network, and the clients that you have, some implementations of the new security is pretty easy. Like we're doing it on 802.1x networks in 6 gig, and it was fairly painless for our users. To do it on other wireless networks, it's not as easy. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the security that comes with, you know, especially 6 gig, but the security permutations that come with the different security that you're using on your SSIDs. You really got to understand that before you kind of leave the old world and come into the new. I do know for a fact that for some vendors, you upgrade for new AX APs, the same devices, the same controllers that, you know, run old 11N APs, the code changes, and suddenly maybe you've got to replace APs that you really didn't want to change yet. That's a fact of life. Often the, you know, kind of tangential, but certainly related, you know, we're finding out that Windows 11 Enterprise, with a feature called Credential Guard being enforced, you're out of the PEEP and MS-CHAP v2 business for 802.1x, even if you're not ready for it. So what does that mean? Does it mean you go to TLS? Doesn't mean you go to an open network and come up with some other security paradigm. And this is where JJ, if she's listening, is just kind of grimacing that I said, do you go to an open network? But the bottom line is there are other things happening in the bigger wireless world that might shape how you have to shape your 11AX deployments. And this just, you know, nothing exists in a vacuum. All of this stuff is related, and unfortunately it can all hit at the same time. You know, for some vendors, 11AX is a departure. Maybe there's new code under the hood. They ditched an old operating system to go to a new operating system. The old hardware is so different feeling in configuration, or new cloud management offerings is so different from what they did, or the licensing paradigms are so divergent from what you're used to, divergent being a polite word, than what you're used to, that it can feel like you're starting over. So that might be a point of reflection. Do we do an RFP for 11AX and not just take for granted that we continue with the same vendor? Unfortunately, it's just not as simple as putting out new APs. So as I get to the point where I will summarize, and hopefully we have time to chat a little bit. Basically with every new standard, after 11AC, with 11AX, Wi-Fi 7, it's no different. The CWNE study guide, the Bible that everybody is very, very fond of, and rightfully so. Every time there's a new standard, you can add 3 pounds to that stupid thing, but you got to keep up. You have no choice. Where you get left behind. You got to live with that which you deploy, which means you have to understand it. Back to the underlying premise of the first bullet there. You really do have to consider your tools, not just for design, but also for support, things like spectrum analysis and what you can see, packet capture, all of that. The PoE switches, again, not just the PoE side of it, but the uplinks and all the related ancillary stuff. If you're putting out Wi-Fi 6E and you expect a lot of Wi-Fi 6E clients to come along, but you don't have any performance sensors, or you don't have any visibility into Wi-Fi 6E, you got to decide, is that something else we've got to evolve and we've got to upgrade and all of that. And one little screenshot there at the bottom, the 11AX, I'm seeing, if you look right in the middle where it says the number 5, 5 6 gig clients out of 553, I'm seeing what used to be 1% is becoming 2%, 3% with the latest Pixels and iPads and all of that. The client counts are slowly picking up, but they very much are picking up. And I expect that to be, faster, probably within the next 6 months, just based on what I'm seeing. I expect to see real growth that justifies and makes you feel glad that you put out the 6 gig. So it doesn't matter if you jump in now, if you jump in later, the same concerns, they're not going away. Wi-Fi world, it's changing. It always has been changing. We've been doing this for, like I said before, 20 plus odd years. Even if you don't change today, you'll change sooner or later, whether you want to or not. You just got to evolve. And life after 11AC, I've just given you a little bit of a look at how I'm seeing it and what I'm dealing with. And, for me, it came along whether I was ready or not. And, I'm still learning to live with it, but it's handleable. You just have to approach it like a professional. And with that, hopefully we've got some time left.
I think we do. Thanks a lot, Lee. That was a great one. And want to invite anybody that's listening in to put your questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll do our best to tackle them. One of the things I thought was that I learned was about Windows 11 Enterprise and trying to get away from PEEP with MS Chat v2. And I can't imagine what an enormous headache that would be with a huge BYOD network like you have to manage, Lee. So hopefully that doesn't apply to Windows 11 Home Edition or whatever they call it these days. But
well, I know
yeah.
for 11 Enterprise, if it finds that that's what you're trying to make it do, it'll downgrade itself to Windows 10.
Wow.
The OS will downgrade itself. So, I mean, they're pretty serious about it. And, anybody can make the case, well, we should have retired PEEP and MS Chat v2, 10 years ago. Well, there's a lot of things you can say we should have done, but we didn't. And there's a lot of reasons why we all haven't. it doesn't make it any easier just to wave the "I told you so" flag. But now we're actually seeing real repercussions for not evolving.
And if it's an enterprise managed device that your organization controls, you can use Active Directory and GPO and, push out certs, and all that is, beautiful and automated, and it can work. But if somebody shows up with a different client and just wants to use the network securely, and they're not managed by your organization, now you have to probably put them through some kind of painful BYOD onboarding portal or something like that. Or like you said, Lee, just start an open network and make it internet only, maybe. Go from there.
Yeah, definitely things to contemplate.
So good question here from Mike in the Q&A panel. And I've got some thoughts on this too. He asks, any good references for WPA3/OWE enterprise endpoint AX upgrade migrations? I think,
yeah, I was gonna. Well, you go ahead, Jim. Then I'll tell you what I did. But by all means, please go ahead.
JJ Manila at WLPC had a great talk on preparing and getting ready for WPA3, and one of my big takeaways is just deploy it now. You don't have to wait till you're forced by 6 gigahertz. And in fact, if you kind of do that in advance of deploying 6 gigahertz APs, then that's one less thing to worry about once you're there. So, and then I've seen a lot of blogs and knowledge base articles from each of the AP vendors. I can think of Cisco and Juniper and Extreme and Aruba have all posted. These are your SSID strategies for using WPA3 to make it work with, of course, clients that use all 3 bands.
Yeah, it's all good points. And one thing that helped me is as I was contemplating, do I roll this out now? Do I not? Talking to the vendor, if you can find the right person, if you have an inroad to the vendor that, knows their stuff and not just tack, whoever you get, luck of the draw. If you find somebody who's really savvy with their particular interface and things that have happened with that particular product set, and that have led them to make good recommendations, and especially for certain verticals, I found that to be very, very helpful, rather than just putting my thumb up in the wind and hoping the right breeze hit it and that sort of thing. But I was going to say, other than JJ, hopefully you've got a good vendor resource, even if it's an SE who truly knows what they're talking about. That can be helpful as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's it for Q&A, unless there's any last minute things. Heather, I think
that was too
good.
easy.
Yeah.
You just did too good of a job, Lee. Answered all their questions before they could even get a chance to get in that Q&A panel. It's good stuff. Awesome. Well, that wraps up today's session. Thank you so much, Lee, for joining us. Wonderful as always. Thanks, Jim, for jumping in there and contributing. And thanks to you for joining us today. You know where we will be, same time, same place next week. So we will see you there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.